imagine you are like the absolute best performer on your remote team. And I mean, genuinely the best.
Right. Flawless numbers, always ahead of schedule.
Exactly. The quality of your deliverables is incredibly high, and you never cause any drama.
The dream employee, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So picture sitting down for your annual performance review. You've got the video call open. You're expecting this glowing conversation, maybe even, the groundwork for a promotion. But instead, your manager looks at their second monitor, sighs slightly, and says, "To be honest, I sometimes forget she's on the team."
Ugh. That's a completely chilling thought.
It is.
Doing everything right, hitting every single metric, but practically ceasing to exist in the eyes of leadership just because, you're out of their direct line of sight.
It's terrifying. And based on the stack of research and case studies we're looking at for today's deep dive, it's actually happening all the time.
Yeah.
So that is our mission today. We are solving the invisible worker paradox, because the brutal reality of remote work is that you can be incredible at your job, but if no one actively sees it, your manager's brain doesn't just automatically fill that silence with assumptions of your excellence.
No, really doesn't. And the cognitive psychology behind this is actually fascinating. It's tied to this thing called the availability heuristic.
Right, which means what exactly in this context?
Basically, human brains rely on the most immediate examples that come to mind when they're evaluating a decision. So if a manager is asked to evaluate their team, they don't rigorously review every single line of code or every closed ticket over the last year.
Because nobody has time for that.
Exactly. They evaluate based on who comes to mind most easily. Usually that's the person making the most noise or the person causing the most friction, or literally just the person who happens to sit next to them in the office.
Wow. So if you're a quiet, highly competent remote worker,
the brain simply fills the gap with absence.
That is wild. So competence actually becomes a liability if it's completely silent.
It really does. But before we get into the actual mechanics of fixing this, we need to establish this foundational mindset shift right away.
Good call. Because I know people get weird about this stuff.
Yeah, they do. When we talk about professional visibility, we are not talking about becoming a gross self-promoter. We are not telling you to become that person who constantly humble brags in the general Slack channel.
Right, because that makes so many highly capable professionals incredibly uncomfortable. It feels boastful, it feels arrogant. And, well, depending on your cultural background, speaking openly about your own achievements might actually be heavily frowned upon.
Exactly. We really have to separate visibility from ego. The goal here isn't to move from being quiet to being louder, because louder is just, performing busyness.
It's the digital equivalent of leaving your jacket on your office chair so people think you're working late.
Yes. Perfect analogy. The actual goal is to move from being quiet to being clearer. Clearer is communication.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if the goal is clarity, we really need to look at the data on why this invisibility is disproportionately affecting certain people. And then we're going to give you the exact phrases, literally the exact words you can start using today to rewire how leadership perceives you.
Yeah, and the structural reality of the modern workplace is pretty stark when you look at the numbers. The data from the Microsoft Work Trend Index shows that remote workers are 43% more likely to report feeling overlooked for promotions.
43%.
42% more likely to feel overlooked for promotions or key projects than their in-office counterparts.
That is massive.
It is. And the crucial context here is that this happens despite those same remote workers reporting equal, or in many cases even higher productivity levels.
Which basically proves that working harder from your home office does not close the visibility gap. It is fundamentally not an output problem. It is a packaging problem.
Yes, exactly.
Let's look at that classic scenario from our sources. So, picture a mid-size e-commerce product manager. Let's just say this is you. Here, shipping complex features, you're coordinating across 3 different time zones.
Doing the heavy lifting.
Right. And you talk to your manager, who happens to be based in Amsterdam, once a week for a standard one-on-one. You shipped 2 massive features last month. But your VP of product, your skip level leader, doesn't even know your name.
Yep.
You've never been in a meeting with her. Your manager hasn't mentioned you in the last 2 all-hands sessions.
That's the danger zone right there.
Yeah.
Because that VP of product is forming her view of the entire department based entirely on what she can see.
Right.
She is deciding who's sharp, who's growing, who gets assigned to the high-stakes Q4 initiative.
Yeah.
And right now, she sees absolutely nothing from you.
I think about it like It's like building an absolute masterpiece of a painting, but you're doing it in a locked basement.
Oh, I like that.
Right. Like, the evidence of your hard work exists. It's all there in the closed Jira tickets, the resolved bug reports, the endless buried Slack threads. But no one upstairs has the key to the basement. You're basically relying on a manager to actively play detective to figure out your worth.
And that completely relies on a misunderstanding of how advocacy actually works in a corporate structure.
Hmm.
Your manager cannot advocate for you in rooms you aren't in if you haven't made it effortlessly easy for them to describe exactly what you are doing.
Effortlessly easy being the key phrase there.
Totally. Think about the cognitive load on your manager. They have their own work, their own anxieties, and maybe, 15 minutes a week with that VP of product?
Yeah, if they're lucky.
Right. And
Yeah.
in those 15 minutes, they need to justify their own existence. If they have to spend 5 of those minutes trying to mentally reconstruct your recent accomplishments from memory, they simply won't do it. You have to hand them the soundbite.
Okay, so if the problem is getting lost in that basement of buried threads, how do we actually change the framing of our daily messages? Like, in a sea of endless chat notifications, how do we move from just adding to the noise to providing a clear, unmistakable signal?
It starts with rethinking the asynchronous update. We have to change the opening frame. The specific phrase from the research that alters the entire dynamic of an update is sharing a quick signal on where this stands.
Wait, sharing a quick signal, not just like, hey, here's an update or thought you should know.
Nope.
Why does that specific wording matter so much?
What's fascinating here is the psychology of the recipient. Think about a manager's relationship with their chat app. When they see a notification pop up, their heart rate often spikes slightly.
Oh, totally. The Slack knock sound gives me anxiety.
Exactly. Because 90% of the time, a message falls into one of two categories. Someone is asking them to solve a problem, or someone is reacting emotionally to something. It is a demand on their energy.
Right, it's a burden.
Yes. So when you open a message with sharing a quick signal, you instantly lower their cortisol. You frame the information as curated, intentional, and confident.
Oh, I see. It tells the reader, I have evaluated the situation, I've distilled the noise, and I am handing you the signal.
Exactly. It sounds like something a senior leader would say to a peer.
You're giving, not taking.
Okay,
I
cool.
love that. And then there's the follow-up phrase, which the sources highlight as the ultimate async update. It's the mechanism that actually hands your manager the key to that basement we talked about.
Yep.
And that phrase is, here's where things stand and what's coming next.
It is brilliant in its brevity. It provides a complete status update in a single, standardized frame.
Let's use the exact example from the source material to see how this operates in the wild. Imagine you post this in your team channel. Here's where things stand and what's coming next. The API integration is complete, the QA pass starts tomorrow, and we're tracking to the Friday release.
Look at the heavy lifting those 3 sentences are doing.
Right.
You are delivering 2 critical pieces of information simultaneously: the current state of the project and the forward motion. Most employees only provide a historical report. They just list what they finished.
Yeah, I did X.
Exactly. But when you actively project what you are driving toward next, you prove that you can manage yourself. You instantly distinguish yourself from the people who need to be constantly prompted for next steps.
You're answering their questions before they even have to type them out.
Exactly.
But a lot of remote work isn't just broadcasting your own individual updates. It's about how you interact in shared spaces, like the team channels where a dozen people are discussing a problem. Leaving a thumbs up emoji on someone else's post doesn't exactly establish your professional brand.
No, it really doesn't. True visibility requires generosity. It's about how you collaborate in public spaces. Leadership watches how you interact with others just as closely as they watch your individual output.
Right. And the phrase the sources highlight for navigating these shared threads is building on what Name said.
Yeah.
So, for example, you might write, building on what Priya said about the onboarding sequence, we saw something similar in the APAC rollout last quarter, and the fix was surprisingly simple.
This is a highly strategic tool. You are doing 2 things simultaneously here. First, you're collaborating in public by adding real substance and historical context to the conversation. And second, you are generously amplifying a colleague. You aren't competing with Priya. You are extending her idea. That combination of analytical substance and interpersonal generosity is rare, and it's exactly what leadership looks for in future managers.
Okay, I see the utility there, but I actually have to push back on this strategy a bit.
Okay, let's hear it.
Wait, if I am always building on what others say, am I ever actually leading? aren't I permanently putting myself in second position? It feels like there's a real risk of doing this clumsily, where you just sound like a parrot repeating Priya's idea just to steal credit.
This is a really sharp observation.
How do you ensure your building actually adds distinct value so you don't just look like a professional echo?
So that is a critical distinction to make. If you just say, building on what Priya said, I totally agree, you are just being a parrot. You are siphoning her credibility without adding your own.
Right.
The anatomy of doing this correctly requires two parts. Validation, followed by new data or context. You validate the original speaker, and then you introduce a variable that wasn't in the room before, like that APAC rollout data you mentioned.
Ah, okay. The new data is the key.
Yes. And regarding your point about always being in second position, you really have to view this as just one tool in a broader set. This phrase is specifically designed for open discussions and existing threads.
Got it.
When you have original findings or a completely new proposal, you don't wait for someone else to speak so you can build on it. You lead directly. But when someone else has opened a door, this is how you walk through it visibly rather than silently.
That makes a lot of sense. It requires you to actually bring new data to the table.
Exactly.
So let's look at another scenario. Live meetings. Specifically, cross-functional calls that are run by someone else, where you're just an attendee, the floor is open, a question is asked, and you know the answer. How do you speak up without sounding like you're inserting yourself out of pure ego?
The phrasing the research suggests for that exact moment is, I can take that one. I've been close to it this week.
That is a very subtle distinction. I've been close to it. Why is that more effective than saying, I know the answer, or I'm the expert on this?
Because it establishes authority based purely on data proximity rather than ego. When you say, I'm the expert, you're making a claim about your own identity, which can instantly trigger defensiveness or skepticism in others.
Oh, for sure. People get defensive immediately.
Right. But when you say, I've been close to it this week, you are simply stating a factual reality. You are close to the data right now. It justifies your intervention logically.
That's so smart.
If the VP of product asks a complex question to the room and you step in with that phrase, you have confidently flagged your relevance to a senior leader without a trace of arrogance. It's offering the floor, not demanding it.
It's a much safer way to demonstrate competence. So, okay, we've looked at daily async updates, we've looked at thread etiquette, and we've covered live meetings, but everything we've discussed so far essentially just proves that you are good at executing your job.
Sure.
It's one thing to prove you can manage a checklist, but that only proves you're a good worker bee. If leadership is looking for someone to run the next major initiative, how do they know you actually have strategic vision if they never see you standing at a whiteboard?
That is the leap from execution to strategy. Leaders don't just want to know that tasks are being completed. They want to know that the overall approach is being evaluated.
Right.
The phrase designed to make your strategic brain visible is, I've been thinking about how we approach.
Let's look at the specific application from the text. You don't just post, I finished the weekly traffic analysis. You say, I've been thinking about how we approach the checkout flow. I noticed we have a 12% higher drop-off rate on mobile than desktop. Might be worth a deeper look before we scale the paid campaign.
Look at the difference in perception there. You aren't just a cog completing a repetitive task. You are actively analyzing the business. You spotted a discrepancy, implied a recommendation, and invited action.
Yeah, it shows initiative.
Exactly. In a traditional office, your manager might overhear you discussing this anomaly with a colleague in the hallway. In a remote setup, they cannot watch you think. You have to deliberately manufacture those hallway moments by making the invisible work of thinking visible in text.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. If we combine that strategic thinking with the need to make advocacy effortless for your manager, we arrive at what the sources call the Friday ritual.
Yes.
This is essentially a self-initiated public performance review that you conduct every single week.
And it is arguably one of the highest leverage habits a remote worker can build.
So the phrase is, wrapping up the week, here's what moved forward and what I'm carrying into next week. And then you just list 2 or 3 bullet points.
Keep it punchy.
Right. Like, vendor contracts are signed, the Q3 campaign brief is drafted and in review. Next week, I'm focused on the partner integration.
Perfect.
Now, if I'm listening to this, I might be cringing a bit. Do I really want to be the person sending an unprompted Friday wrap-up to my boss if they didn't ask for one? It feels very corporate. Does the research show how managers actually react to this?
It is a totally valid concern, but the research shows that managers overwhelmingly appreciate it. Because it removes a massive burden from their plate.
Because they're busy too.
Exactly. Think about the concept of managing up. When you send that 30-second read, you're arming them with exact, concrete bullet points. When they inevitably sit down with their director on Tuesday and are asked, hey, how is the e-commerce team tracking? Your manager doesn't have to guess or stumble.
Just use your list.
They have your exact phrasing fresh in their mind. You made it effortless for them to champion you.
And there is a secondary benefit that is almost more important. Even if your manager is totally swamped and doesn't even read your message that Friday afternoon,
It doesn't matter.
it doesn't matter. It is still there. You are systematically building a permanent, searchable database of your own success. Come annual review time, when everyone else is struggling to remember what they did in February, you literally just search your own wrapping up the week messages.
Your entire case for a raise is already written.
Chronologically documented and time-stamped.
That documentation is invaluable because it completely bypasses the recency bias, where people only remember what happened in the last month.
Right.
But, as with all communication strategies, there are pitfalls. You can apply all of these frameworks perfectly and still completely undermine your professional brand with a few common passive habits.
Which means we need to look at the sabotage phrases, the things you need to eliminate from your vocabulary immediately. First on the chopping block, the just trap. Specifically, hey, just checking in.
We see this constantly in remote environments.
Yeah.
Hey, just checking in on where this stands.
It is toxic to your professional image. And look, I completely understand why we do it. It stems from conflict avoidance. You're waiting on a colleague who is 3 days late with a deliverable. You don't want to seem aggressive, so you soften the blow. Just checking in.
Right.
But it makes you sound incredibly passive. You sound apologetic for your own entirely reasonable need for information to do your job.
It shrinks your request before anyone else even has a chance to respond.
Well,
You are managing a project.
yeah.
You need a status update.
Yeah.
Do not apologize for that operational necessity.
So what should we say instead?
Instead of just checking in, the research suggests asking for specific timelines. Can you give me a quick signal on the timeline for the vendor sign-off? I need to build it into the project plan. It is specific, it is purposeful, and it completely removes the emotional weight from the request.
So much better. Okay, the second sabotage phrase is what the sources refer to as the apologetic disclaimer. This is when you lead a weekly update with what you didn't do. Something along the lines of, I haven't had much to report this week, but...
This is an absolute disaster for your visibility, and it ties back to a psychological concept called the framing effect. Before you have shared a single piece of useful information, you've already explicitly instructed your manager to view your week as light, unproductive, or disappointing.
Wow, yeah.
You have framed the data negatively before they even read it.
It proves that the framing of an update is just as important as the content itself. If you preface a modest victory with a giant apology for it not being a massive victory, all anyone remembers is the apology. Never lead with what you didn't accomplish. Even a small update, stated with confidence and clarity, reads infinitely better than a major achievement hidden behind an insecure disclaimer.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what we are really talking about here is the realization that the work itself and the communication of the work are two entirely separate skill sets.
Yeah, that's the core of it.
Most professionals spend their entire careers only practicing the first one. But in a remote environment, if you neglect the second skill, the first one almost doesn't matter. You have to consciously practice the art of translation. You have to translate your invisible effort into visible value.
Which brings us to your challenge for today. We want you to take this out of the realm of abstract theory and put it into practice immediately. Before you log off today, not tomorrow, not next week, post one message in your team's main channel or directly to your manager using this exact frame. Here's where things stand and what's coming next.
Add your 2 sentences of context and hit send.
See the immediate difference in how people respond to that clear, confident framing.
And hey, if you're feeling ambitious, try initiating that Friday wrap-up ritual this week. Even if nobody asked for it, you might be surprised by how quickly it becomes a team standard.
Give them the key to the basement. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, building on this idea of building a searchable record. What if you stopped viewing your daily chat messages as disposable, ephemeral little conversations? What if, starting today, you viewed your entire Slack or Teams history as a live, searchable, permanent portfolio of your professional competence? Every single message is a pitch. What is yours saying about you? Stop building masterpieces in the dark. Turn on the lights, hand over the key, and let them see what you can do.